The Galactic Maritime Commission had protocols for everything. 17,000 pages of regulations covered every conceivable scenario when boarding vessels in space. The Zephyrians needed their atmospheric processors to cycle 3 times before entry, their delicate respiratory systems requiring precise gas mixtures that took exactly 47 minutes to achieve. The crystalline quell required electromagnetic shielding to prevent their forms from destabilizing. Their silicon-based bodies could shatter like glass if exposed to the wrong frequency of radiation. The gaseous Nethians had to compress themselves into containment suits, a process so uncomfortable that most refused interspecies contact entirely. Each species had their quirks, their needs, their carefully documented requirements that had been negotiated, debated, and codified over millennia of galactic civilization. The Commission's bureaucrats took pride in their thoroughness, their ability to accommodate even the most exotic forms of life that had emerged from the galaxy's countless worlds. But humans? The Commission's files simply stated, species classification, death world survivors, boarding requirement, environmental suits must be removed before entry. No exceptions. Reference, Emergency Protocol 847 Alpha, Subsection 12, Uncontrolled Technology Transfer Prevention. Captain Marcus Rodriguez of the merchant vessel Terra's Pride stared at the notice transmitted from the approaching vegan trade ship Silk Harmony. The message had arrived 3 hours ago, and he'd read it 17 times, hoping the words would somehow change. After 6 months of delicate negotiations conducted through subspace communications, after the careful diplomatic dance that had finally granted humanity permission to enter galactic trade routes, this was their first official mission beyond their home system. The weight of history pressed down on his shoulders. 300 years since humanity had developed faster than light travel. 3 centuries of lonely expansion, building colonies on hostile worlds, fighting pirates in the asteroid belts, surviving in the black between stars with nothing but their wits and their technology. Now, finally, they had a chance to join something bigger than themselves. And the aliens wanted them to strip naked. They want us to what? Asked Engineer Patricia O'Brien, her helmet's HUD casting blue reflections across her weathered face. She'd spent 15 years maintaining life support systems in the worst conditions imaginable: solar flares that could cook a person in their suit, asteroid impacts that turned ship corridors into vacuum-filled death traps, equipment failures in the depths of space where the nearest help was months away. The idea of voluntarily removing her environmental protection made her skin crawl. "Remove our suits before boarding their ship," Marcus replied, reading the transmission again. His voice carried the flat tone of a man trying to process something fundamentally incomprehensible. "It's apparently mandatory, non-negotiable." They've sent 3 different versions of the same message, each one more emphatic than the last. The crew exchanged glances through their faceplates. Communications Officer James Wright pulled up the technical specifications they'd been provided about vegan vessels. "Sir, their atmosphere looks compatible. Standard oxygen-nitrogen mix, pressure within human tolerance ranges, temperature controlled. But their hull specifications." He paused, double-checking his readings. "Sir, their hull plating is barely 3 centimeters thick." O'Brien whistled softly. 3 centimeters? That wouldn't stop a micrometeorite moving at standard orbital velocity. Hell, a determined bird could probably punch through that. "Maybe they don't have birds where they come from," suggested weapons specialist Maria Santos, though her joke fell flat in the tense atmosphere of the bridge. "Sir," Wright continued, "they're transmitting docking procedures. They want us to use their airlock system, not ours. And they're requesting that we power down all active systems except basic life support." Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. In 3 decades of void operations, he'd learned that unusual requests usually preceded unusual problems. But humanity had waited too long for this opportunity. Earth's governments had invested billions in this mission, and the colony worlds were depending on establishing trade relationships to get access to galactic technology and resources. "What's our assessment of their weapons capability?" he asked Santos. "Minimal, sir. Their ship mounts what appears to be standard merchant protection, plasma cutters for clearing debris, maybe some basic point defense systems. Nothing that could threaten us unless we were already crippled. And their crew complement? 43 souls, all vegan nationals. No military personnel detected. Marcus studied the approaching vessel through the main viewer. The Silk Harmony was beautiful in the way that only peaceful civilizations could create. Flowing lines, artistic hull decorations, transparent sections that showed gardens growing inside the ship. It looked more like a flying work of art than a functional spacecraft. It also looked fragile. Compared to the Terra's Pride, with her armored hull and redundant systems, the vegan ship seemed like it was made of spun glass and good intentions. They've been flying ships like this for over 1,000 years, Marcus said aloud, more to convince himself than to inform his crew. They must know what they're doing. Sir, O'Brien said quietly, what if this is some kind of test? What if they want to see how much we trust them? The thought had occurred to Marcus as well. First contact protocols from a dozen different science fiction stories ran through his mind, each one warning about the importance of showing good faith to alien civilizations. But those were stories. This was real, and real meant that mistakes could get people killed. Patch me through to the Silk Harmony, he ordered Wright. Let's see if we can get some clarification on these protocols. The response came back within minutes, delivered in the same calm, patient tone that had characterized all their previous communications. Honored Captain Rodriguez, we understand your concerns about safety. Please be assured that our vessel maintains full atmospheric integrity and emergency protocols. The boarding requirements are standard galactic regulation, established for the safety and comfort of all species involved. We look forward to welcoming you aboard. It was polite, professional, and completely unhelpful. Marcus looked around at his crew, for humans who had volunteered to represent their entire species in galactic civilization. Each one of them had survived disasters that would have killed anyone from a safer world. They'd faced vacuum exposure, radiation storms, equipment failures, and hostile action with the calm professionalism that came from knowing their gear and trusting their training. But now they were being asked to step into an alien environment without any of the equipment that had kept them alive for their entire careers. All right, people, Marcus said, his decision made. We came here to make contact with galactic civilization, and we're not backing down now. But we go by the book. Full biosafety protocols, emergency signals established, and if anything feels wrong, we abort immediately. The crew nodded, understanding. In the void, paranoia wasn't a character flaw. It was a survival trait that had kept humanity alive in the most hostile environment in the universe. They would remove their helmets and trust alien life support systems, because that was the price of admission to galactic society. But they would not go unprepared. Captain Zarthex of the Silk Harmony watched through the observation deck as the primitive human vessel approached, its angular hull scarred by countless encounters with the harshness of space. His forearms gestured nervously as he spoke to his first officer, bioluminescent patches along his elongated neck flickering between worried yellow and anxious green. The human ship was wrong in every way that mattered to vegan sensibilities. Where their vessels flowed like living things, embracing the elegance of natural forms refined over millennia, the Terra's Pride looked like it had been hammered together by someone who expected to be shot at regularly. Its hull plating was thick enough to walk on, studded with sensor arrays that swept space with the paranoid intensity of a prey animal watching for predators. Are you absolutely certain about the regulations, Feldan? Zarthex asked, his voice carrying harmonics of deep unease. They're a Deathworld species. Their planet's gravity is twice standard. Their atmosphere is corrosive to most life forms, and their sun bombards them with lethal radiation daily. According to our xenobiology reports, their home system is so hostile that it's technically classified as a hazardous waste zone. First Officer Feldan consulted her datapad with two hands while the other two adjusted the ship's atmospheric controls with practiced precision. Her own patches shifted through careful shades of bureaucratic blue as she recited the regulations. The Maritime Commission's directives are unambiguous, Captain. Section 847 Alpha clearly states that no Deathworld species may board civilian vessels while equipped with protective technology. The risk assessment protocols are specific about this. The Crothan incident, Zarthex whispered, his patches dimming to the deep purple of remembered horror. Every spacer in the galaxy knew the story, passed down through 3 centuries of cautionary tales. The Crothan were a warrior species from a high-gravity world, proud and honorable in their own way, who had sought to establish diplomatic relations with the peaceful Arcturian Trade Federation. What should have been a simple cultural exchange had turned into a nightmare when the Crothan delegation boarded the civilian transport Golden Peace wearing what they considered ceremonial dress uniforms. The Arcturians, being a species that had evolved from herbivorous herd animals, had no concept of personal armor or weapons. They couldn't have known that Crothan's ceremonial gear included plasma rifles capable of vaporizing starship bulkheads, or that their guest's polite bow was actually a weapon readiness stance. The misunderstanding had lasted exactly 4 seconds. When the Golden Piece's automatic systems detected energy weapons charging, they triggered emergency protocols that the Crothan interpreted as a hostile act. The ensuing firefight had left half the ship's structure vaporized, 17 Arcturians dead, and both species so traumatized that they'd refused contact for 2 centuries. The humans seem more reasonable than the Crothan, Felden offered hopefully, though her patches betrayed her uncertainty with flickers of doubt orange. Their communications have been polite, formal, very careful about protocol. They've followed every procedure we've outlined. That's exactly what worries me, Zarthex muttered, 2 arms working the ship's sensors, while the others accessed the growing file of intelligence reports about humanity. Look at these readings, Felden. Their ship masses 3 times what our initial scans detected. Either they're carrying impossibly dense cargo, or their hull plating is thick enough to withstand a direct hit from a military-grade plasma cannon. The first officer leaned over his shoulder, studying the sensor data. Perhaps their construction methods are simply robust? Robust. Zarthex's patches flashed incredulous silver. Felden, their ship could ram a small moon and probably survive. According to these energy readings, their reactor output exceeds most military vessels in the Confederation Navy. This isn't robust engineering. This is military-grade paranoia made manifest. Neither vegan truly grasped the reality of human space travel. They couldn't comprehend a species that had learned to navigate by flying through asteroid fields rather than around them, treating space debris as minor inconveniences rather than ship-killing hazards. The concept of building vessels to survive impacts from objects traveling at relativistic speeds was so foreign to their experience that their minds simply couldn't process it. Captain, the ship's communications officer called from across the bridge. The humans are requesting permission to scan our life support systems. They say it's standard safety protocol. Zarthex felt his patches shift to deep worry purple. They want to scan our life support? What kind of species scans their host's environmental systems? The kind that doesn't trust anyone else to keep them alive, Felden murmured, accessing more files from the xenobiology database. Captain, look at this. According to their cultural profile, humans have a saying, trust but verify. They apparently apply this philosophy to everything from interpersonal relationships to atmospheric processors. They don't trust our life support systems? I don't think they trust anyone's life support systems except their own. Felden's patches flickered through a confused spectrum of colors. Their files indicate they routinely carry personal atmospheric recyclers, emergency oxygen supplies, and backup power sources on their own ships, which they built themselves. Zarthex stared at the approaching human vessel with growing comprehension. They're not just cautious, are they? They're genuinely, pathologically paranoid about everything that could possibly go wrong. The xenopsychology reports suggest it's a survival trait, Felden confirmed. Their species evolved on a world that actively tried to kill them, then spent centuries in space environments that were even more hostile. Paranoia isn't a character flaw for humans. It's the reason they're still alive. The captain watched as the Terra's Pride adjusted its approach vector, its movements precise and controlled despite the obvious massive over-engineering of its maneuvering systems. Every action the human ship took suggested a crew that expected disaster at any moment and was prepared for it. Grant their scanning request, Zarthex decided, but monitor everything they're doing. If they're anything like the preliminary reports suggest, They're probably already analyzing our ship's structural integrity, emergency protocols, and backup systems. Should we be concerned about that? Zarthex considered the question, his patches cycling through thoughtful violet hues. I'm not sure yet. On one hand, it suggests they're preparing for problems we haven't even considered. On the other hand, he paused, watching the human ship's perfect docking approach. I have the uncomfortable feeling that by the time they leave our ship, they're going to know more about its capabilities and weaknesses than we do. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Ask me again after we see what they consider basic safety precautions, the captain replied, his patches settling into the resigned gray of someone facing the inevitable. Something tells me we're about to learn why the Maritime Commission requires them to remove their protective equipment. As the human ship completed its approach, Zarthex couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to host visitors who viewed the universe as an actively hostile environment that required constant vigilance, overwhelming preparation, and multiple backup plans for every conceivable disaster. He was more right than he knew. The docking proceeded smoothly, which immediately put the vegan crew on edge. In their extensive experience with interspecies contact, procedures that went exactly according to plan usually meant they were missing something crucial. When dealing with Deathworld species, easy usually preceded catastrophic. Captain Rodriguez and his away team stood in the human airlock, their environmental suits powered down but still sealed, like armor worn by warriors who had agreed to a temporary ceasefire. The readings from the vegan ship showed breathable atmosphere, but 300 years of void survival had bred a level of caution into humanity that bordered on the pathological. Every human child learned the Voidwalker's motto before they could properly walk. Space is trying to kill you, and it's very good at its job. Atmosphere looks good, O'Brien reported, her fingers dancing across her suit's diagnostic panel with the practiced ease of someone who had checked life support systems in every conceivable emergency. 21% oxygen, nitrogen balance within optimal ranges, pressure at 1.02 standard atmospheres. Temperatures running 26 Celsius, warm but manageable. Trace gases include. She paused, running more detailed scans. Interesting. They've got some exotic atmospheric components I've never seen before, but the computer says they're inert as far as human physiology is concerned. Gravity? Asked Wright, automatically running through the pre-boarding checklist that had been drilled into him since academy training. 0.87 standard, Santos replied, consulting her own instruments. We'll feel light on our feet, but nothing we can't adapt to. Their artificial gravity systems are remarkably smooth. I'm reading less fluctuation than most human ships manage. Rodriguez nodded, processing the information with the methodical care of a man who had survived 17 years in space by never taking anything for granted. The vegan ship's environmental systems were clearly sophisticated, possibly more advanced than human technology in some respects. But sophistication and reliability were two different things, and only one of them kept people alive when everything went wrong. Structural integrity? He asked, knowing his crew would have already checked but needing to hear it confirmed. That's concerning, sir, O'Brien admitted. Their hull resonance suggests plating that's barely adequate for normal space operations. I'm reading stress indicators that would have our engineers screaming for immediate dock time and hull replacement. But the vegans seem to consider this normal operational status. Rodriguez felt the familiar knot of command responsibility tightening in his chest. Every decision carried the weight of not just his crew's lives, but humanity's entire future relationship with galactic civilization. Get this wrong, and Earth might find itself isolated for another 3 centuries. All right, people, he said, reaching for his helmet seals with hands that had performed this action thousands of times in dozens of different emergency situations. Remember, we're ambassadors first, Voidwalkers second. We show them that humans can be trusted, that we can follow their protocols, and that we're worth having as trading partners. The helmet seals disengaged with the sharp click of sophisticated mechanisms releasing, a sound that echoed in the airlock like gunshots in a cathedral. The familiar hiss of pressure equalization followed, then the subtle shift in air quality as their suit systems switched from internal to external atmosphere. One by one, the human crew removed their helmets, revealing faces that bore the unmistakable marks of people who had spent years breathing recycled air and living under artificial light. Rodriguez went first, as was proper for a captain, lifting the complex piece of equipment that had kept him alive through solar storms, equipment failures, and hostile action across 3 different star systems. The helmet was a masterwork of human engineering, part computer, part life support system, part communication array, and part sensor suite. Its heads-up display could process more information than most planetary defense networks. Its communication systems could punch signals through hyperspace across interstellar distances, and its life support could sustain a human for weeks in hard vacuum. To the watching vegans, it looked like the humans were casually discarding critical life support equipment as if it were nothing more than decorative headwear. On the other side of the airlock's reinforced viewing port, Captain Zarthex watched the proceedings with growing fascination and mounting horror. His xenobiology training had prepared him for many things, but not for the sight of Deathworld survivors treating what his instruments identified as military-grade survival equipment like optional accessories. "They're just taking them off," First Officer Felden whispered, her bioluminescent patches flickering between amazed blue and horrified purple. "Like they're removing hats." Each human helmet that came off revealed more sophisticated technology than most vegan ships carried in their entire sensor suites. The scanning equipment built into what humans apparently considered basic protective gear exceeded the capabilities of dedicated research vessels. The life support systems in a single human helmet could sustain an entire vegan crew for days. "Note this in the cultural contact log," Zarthex ordered, his 4 arms working frantically to record everything they were witnessing. "Humans appear to treat technology that exceeds our military specifications as personal, disposable equipment. Either their manufacturing capabilities are beyond our current understanding, or their definition of expendable is radically different from galactic norms." "Captain," his communications officer called from across the bridge, "I'm picking up active scans from their discarded equipment. Those helmets are still running full sensor sweeps of our ship." Zarthex felt his patches shift to alarmed orange. "They're scanning us? Even after removing their suits?" "It appears to be automatic, sir. Passive monitoring, structural analysis, atmospheric composition, emergency protocol assessment." "Captain, their discarded helmets are currently running more comprehensive scans of our ship than our own diagnostic systems perform during scheduled maintenance." What the vegans didn't understand was that the humans' casual attitude toward their sophisticated equipment came not from carelessness, but from supreme confidence. Every piece of human technology was built to exceed every safety margin imaginable. Then those margins were doubled, tripled, and stress-tested under conditions that would destroy most galactic civilizations. When a human said their equipment was reliable, they meant it had been tested in environments that ranged from the heart of gas giant storms to the radiation-soaked battlefields of asteroid mining wars. When they called something basic gear, they meant it was built to standards that assumed regular exposure to catastrophic system failures, hostile action, and the general malevolence of a universe that seemed personally offended by the continued existence of organic life. "Structural scan complete," O'Brien announced, consulting her helmet's display even as she held it tucked under her arm. "Their ship architecture is remarkably elegant, but I'm reading 17 separate single points of failure in critical systems. Beautiful engineering, but no redundancy to speak of." 17. Wright asked, his own helmet continuing its automatic analysis. "That's optimistic." "Very optimistic," Santos agreed. "I count at least 37 ways this ship could experience catastrophic systems failure, and that's just from what we can scan through the hull plating." Rodriguez listened to his crew's casual assessment of the vegan ship's vulnerabilities with the practiced ear of a commander who had learned to expect the worst from every situation. In the human mindset, identifying potential disasters wasn't pessimism. It was the first step in preventing them. "Keep the observations to yourselves for now," he instructed. "We're guests here, and guests don't critique their host's engineering unless specifically asked." The irony was lost on the humans. They were about to board an alien vessel while unconsciously cataloging every way it could kill them, not out of paranoia or hostility, but out of an instinctive desire to keep everyone aboard alive. On the vegan bridge, Zarthex watched the final preparations for contact and wondered if his ship systems were about to be judged by the standards of a species that viewed the universe as an active threat requiring constant vigilance. He was about to find out exactly how accurate that assessment was. The airlock cycled with the smooth precision of technology that had been refined over centuries of peaceful operation. For the vegans, the gentle hiss of equalizing pressure was the familiar sound of another routine docking procedure. For the humans, it was the moment when they crossed from the relative safety of their own systems into complete dependence on alien technology they had never tested, never maintained, and never personally verified. The first humans in galactic history stepped aboard an alien vessel without environmental protection, their movements careful and controlled despite the lighter gravity. Every human had trained for reduced gravity operations, but training simulations and actual experience were different things. Their steps were measured, cautious, designed to maintain balance while their inner ears adjusted to the changed conditions. The vegan crew had assembled in the main corridor in what they considered a gesture of respect and welcome. For their species, gathering in groups was actually mildly uncomfortable. Their limited telepathic abilities made crowds a sensory challenge, like trying to have a conversation while multiple people whispered in your ears. The fact that Captain Zarthex had assembled his entire senior staff represented a significant honor that would have impressed them more if they'd understood the social cost involved. The corridor itself was a work of art that spoke to fundamentally different engineering philosophies. Where human ship design prioritized function over form, with straight passages that allowed rapid movement during emergencies and clear sightlines for security purposes, the vegan vessel flowed like a living thing. Curved passages followed organic lines that were pleasing to the eye but would channel blast waves in unpredictable directions during explosive decompression. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent lighting that created a warm, welcoming atmosphere while making it impossible to detect subtle changes in air quality that might indicate system failures. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, extending his hand in the universal human gesture of greeting, a custom that dated back to ancient times when showing empty hands proved the absence of weapons. Captain Zarthex, having studied human protocols extensively during the months of pre-contact negotiations, awkwardly attempted to reciprocate with one of his 4 arms. The resulting handshake was clumsy but sincere, representing the first physical contact between human and vegan civilizations. "Welcome aboard the Silk Harmony," Zarthex said, his translator rendering the words in accented English that carried harmonic overtones impossible for human vocal cords to produce. "We are honored to facilitate humanity's first commercial exchange with galactic civilization. This moment marks the beginning of what we hope will be a long and prosperous relationship between our species." "The honor is entirely ours," Rodriguez replied, meaning every word. "We've looked forward to this meeting for a very long time. 3 centuries of isolation ends today, and we couldn't have asked for better hosts to welcome us into galactic society." As the 2 captains exchanged diplomatic pleasantries, the rest of the human crew found themselves fascinated and quietly horrified by the ship's design philosophy. O'Brien studied the flowing architecture with the trained eye of someone who had spent her entire career working in environments where form followed function with ruthless efficiency. The vegan ship was undeniably beautiful, but every aesthetic choice seemed to compromise practical considerations that humans considered essential. "Your ship is absolutely beautiful," she commented to First Officer Feldan, genuine admiration coloring her voice despite her professional concerns. "I've never seen anything like it. The integration of organic design principles with technological systems is remarkable." "Thank you," Feldan replied, her bioluminescent patches brightening with pleasure at the compliment. The Silk Harmony represents 12 centuries of continuous refinement in vegan shipbuilding. Our ancestors began with purely functional vessels, but over time we learned to create spaces that nourish the spirit as well as transport the body. Each generation has added improvements, modifications, aesthetic enhancements that make the ship not just a means of travel, but a work of art. 12 centuries? O'Brien asked, trying to process the concept. This specific ship design has been in development for 1,200 years? Oh yes, the basic hull configuration dates back nearly that far, though of course we've updated the internal systems, improved the efficiency, refined the living spaces. Why? How old are your vessel designs? O'Brien exchanged glances with Wright and Santos, all three thinking of the Terra's Pride specifications. Our ship is about 15 years old, but she's built on hull designs that go back maybe 50 years at most. The newest ships coming off the construction yards use completely different design philosophies than what we flew a century ago. Feldan's patches dimmed with confusion that bordered on dismay. In vegan society, ships were generational projects, carefully refined works of art and engineering that represented the accumulated wisdom of centuries. They were passed down through families, continuously improved by master craftsmen, and considered cultural treasures as much as transportation vehicles. The idea of discarding a perfectly functional design simply to build something new seemed not just wasteful, but almost sacrilegious. "Do human ships not last long?" she asked with delicate concern, her voice carrying harmonics of worry that the translator couldn't quite capture. O'Brien laughed, a sound that carried more edge than she intended. "Oh, they last plenty long if you take care of them. The problem isn't durability, it's obsolescence. We keep building better ones because we keep finding new ways to die in space, and our ships need to keep up with our expanding catalog of disasters." The casual mention of an expanding catalog of disasters sent a collective chill through every vegan within hearing range. Their species had achieved interstellar travel through careful planning, extensive testing, and gradual expansion into increasingly challenging environments. The concept of space travel as an ongoing battle against novel forms of death was so alien to their experience that they couldn't quite process it. "The Pride can take hits that would vaporize most civilian vessels," Wright added helpfully, "but the new Defiance-class ships coming off the yards can probably survive direct impact with small asteroids. Maybe even planned impacts if you needed to use ramming as a tactical option." "Ramming?" Feldan's voice climbed an octave. "You design ships to survive deliberate collisions?" "Well, you never know when you might need to ram something," Santos explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine maintenance procedures. "Hostile vessels, debris fields, sometimes you need to punch through obstacles that you can't go around. It's better to build the capability in from the beginning than to find out you need it when it's too late to retrofit." The vegan crew stared at the humans with growing comprehension of exactly what kind of species they were dealing with. These weren't just cautious travelers from a dangerous world. These were people who actively planned for scenarios that involved using their spacecraft as weapons, who built vessels specifically designed to survive the kind of impacts that would destroy entire vegan colonies, who spoke of ramming tactics like they were discussing weather patterns. Captain Zarthex listened to the exchange with his patches cycling through increasingly alarmed colors. Every casual comment from the human crew revealed another layer of preparation for disasters that vegan civilization had never even considered. These people didn't just expect things to go wrong. They expected things to go wrong in ways so catastrophic that their solutions involved weaponizing their own transportation. "Perhaps," he suggested carefully, "we should proceed to the conference room and begin our formal discussions. I believe both our species have much to learn from each other." What he didn't say was that he was beginning to suspect that the learning experience was going to be far more intense than either side had anticipated. The trade negotiations proceeded with the careful formality of two civilizations trying to understand each other across a gulf of radically different experiences. The conference room aboard the Silk Harmony was another example of vegan aesthetic philosophy: flowing organic curves, soft bioluminescent lighting, and furniture that seemed to have grown rather than been manufactured. To human eyes, it was beautiful but impractical, lacking the emergency stations, backup communication systems, and reinforced structure that would be standard in any comparable human facility. Humans offered rare metals extracted from the hearts of asteroid belts where the radiation would sterilize most known life forms, advanced composite materials forged in the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres, and manufacturing techniques developed in environments that registered as uninhabitable on every galactic habitability scale. Their cargo manifests read like a catalog of impossibilities: materials that shouldn't exist, extracted from places that shouldn't support industrial operations, processed using methods that violated several fundamental assumptions about safe manufacturing practices. In return, the vegans provided cultural artifacts that represented centuries of artistic refinement, exotic foods cultivated in perfect environmental conditions, and most importantly to the humans, detailed star charts showing established trade routes through civilized space. The charts alone were worth the entire expedition. They represented safe passage through regions that human scouts had marked as potentially hostile, shortcuts that could reduce travel time between systems by months, and contact information for dozens of species that might be interested in human goods. It was during the technical exchange, when both sides were demonstrating their respective technologies, that the real culture shock occurred. Wright had volunteered to showcase human data storage and communication systems, pulling out what he considered basic field equipment. To human eyes, his gear was standard issue, the kind of thing any competent technician would carry on routine maintenance calls. "This is our standard portable data storage unit," Wright explained, holding up a device roughly the size of a human palm. "Nothing fancy, just basic field equipment for technical work." Feldan accepted the device with careful reverence, her four hands manipulating it like it might be explosive. Her patches flickered through confused spectral colors as her instruments attempted to analyze what she was holding. "It's quite robust," Wright continued conversationally. "Rated for direct exposure to hard vacuum, temperatures from absolute zero to about 2000 Kelvin, and radiation environments up to—" He paused to check the specifications displayed on his personal communicator. "Let me see. About 50,000 Roentgens per hour for extended periods. The shielding's designed to handle solar flares, gamma-ray bursts, proximity to unstable nuclear reactors, that sort of thing." Captain Zarthex nearly dropped his translator, his patches flashing the bright orange of extreme alarm. 50,000 Roentgens per hour? That radiation level would kill most galactic species in minutes. Some of our more sensitive members would die from brief exposure to a tenth of that dosage. "Yeah, that's why we built in the extra shielding," Wright agreed with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns. "Space is full of nasty radiation, and you never know when you're going to run into a solar storm or get too close to a neutron star. We learned the hard way that electronics die first when the radiation starts cooking everything, so we just assume our gear needs to survive the worst possible conditions." The phrase "learned the hard way" sent another chill through the vegan delegation. In their experience, learning things the hard way usually meant losing ships, crews, or entire colonies. The fact that humans spoke of it as routine educational experience suggested a tolerance for catastrophic failure that bordered on the pathological. O'Brien, sensing an opportunity to demonstrate human engineering philosophy, pulled out her personal toolkit with the casual pride of a master craftsman showing off her trade. Each tool was built to tolerances that exceeded military specifications on most worlds, designed to function in environments that would reduce comparable vegan instruments to their component atoms within minutes. "This is just standard maintenance equipment," she explained, laying out devices that looked more like precision weapons than tools. Multispectral analyzer, quantum state manipulator, molecular forge, emergency fabrication unit. Basic stuff you'd find in any engineer's kit. Feldan picked up the multispectral analyzer with trembling hands, her instruments immediately detecting energy signatures that registered as military-grade sensor equipment. The device in her hands was more sophisticated than the primary sensor array on most vegan exploration vessels. "This is considered basic equipment?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics of disbelief. "Entry-level stuff," O'Brien confirmed cheerfully. "Academy students train on gear like this. I've got the really good tools back on the ship, industrial-grade fabricators, combat-rated diagnostic equipment, emergency reactor assemblies, that kind of thing." "Combat-rated diagnostic equipment?" Zarthex's voice climbed several octaves. "Why would diagnostic equipment need combat ratings?" "Well, you never know when you're going to need to perform emergency repairs under fire," O'Brien explained with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing basic professional requirements. "Hostile action, pirate attacks, system failures during combat operations. If your diagnostic tools can't function while people are shooting at you, they're not much use in a real emergency." The vegan crew began to understand, with growing horror, why galactic regulations required humans to remove their protective gear before boarding civilian vessels. What humans considered basic safety equipment was, by galactic standards, advanced military hardware capable of functions that most species relegated to specialized combat units. Their environmental suits weren't just life support systems, they were walking arsenals of sensor equipment, manufacturing tools, communication arrays, and emergency systems that could probably coordinate the defense of a small planet. Your personal equipment, Zarthex said carefully, appears to exceed the capabilities of our ship's primary systems. Really? Wright looked genuinely surprised. That's... Well, I guess different species have different standards for what constitutes adequate preparation. We just figure it's better to have capabilities you don't need than to need capabilities you don't have. Santos nodded agreement. Our instructors used to say, in space, there's no such thing as overkill, just insufficient preparation and unexpected survivors. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge to everything the vegans thought they knew about reasonable safety margins. Here was a species that didn't just prepare for disaster. They prepared for disasters so catastrophic that their definition of sufficient preparation included personal equipment that could rebuild entire technological civilizations from raw materials. Perhaps, Feldan suggested weakly, we should discuss the specific trade goods you're offering. I believe our economic specialists would be very interested in understanding your manufacturing capabilities. What she didn't say was that she was beginning to suspect that human manufacturing capabilities might revolutionize galactic civilization in ways that no one was prepared for. The demonstration was far from over, but already the vegans were starting to understand why the Maritime Commission had such specific regulations about human boarding procedures. It wasn't fear of human aggression that drove the restrictions. It was fear of human helpfulness. The revelation came during what should have been a routine system check. O'Brien had asked to examine the vegan ship's life support systems, partly out of professional curiosity and partly because human paranoia demanded verification of any environment they couldn't personally control. Your atmospheric recyclers are fascinating, she said, studying the elegant vegan machinery. Very efficient, very clean. But what happens if this primary unit fails? Feldan gestured to a secondary system. The backup unit engages automatically. And if that fails? There's a tertiary system here. O'Brien nodded approvingly, but kept looking. What if something takes out all three? Asteroid impact, solar flare, hostile action. The vegan engineer's patches flickered with confusion. If all three systems failed simultaneously, the ship would be uninhabitable. Right, but what's your emergency backup? Independent air supply, sealed compartments, personal breathing apparatus. We don't have such systems, Feldan admitted. Triple redundancy has always been sufficient. O'Brien stared at her in horror. You're flying through space with no emergency life support? What if someone punctures your hull? Our hulls are designed not to be punctured. But what if they are anyway? Feldan's patches dimmed to almost black. Then, everyone aboard would die. The human engineer immediately began sketching emergency modifications on her datapad. Within minutes, she'd designed 3 different backup systems that could keep the vegan crew alive indefinitely using nothing but spare parts and basic tools. This is why your regulations exist, O'Brien realized aloud. You're not afraid of our weapons or our strength. You're afraid of our paranoia. 6 months after the first successful human trade mission, the Galactic Maritime Commission convened an emergency session that would fundamentally alter interspecies relations for centuries to come. Representatives from 47 different civilizations gathered in the Commission's orbital headquarters above the neutral world of Harmony Station, each bearing reports that painted the same disturbing picture. Humans were helpful to the point of being dangerous. The initial incident reports had seemed routine. Human merchants requesting to inspect safety systems. Human engineers asking innocent questions about emergency protocols. Human crews offering minor suggestions for system improvements. What had initially been dismissed as typical Deathworld paranoia had rapidly escalated into something that threatened the stability of galactic civilization itself. Captain Zarthex of the Silk Harmony found himself serving as the primary witness in hearings that would determine humanity's place in galactic society. His testimony, delivered to the assembled representatives through holographic projection, carried the weight of first-hand experience with human assistance. The modifications began immediately after the human engineer identified what she called unacceptable single points of failure in our life support systems. he explained, his bioluminescent patches cycling through the subdued colors of bureaucratic testimony. Within 3 days of our return to port, human contractors had arrived unsolicited to install emergency upgrades to our atmospheric processors. The Arcturian representative, her crystalline form shimmering with confused frequencies, interjected, "Unsolicited? They performed modifications without authorization. They claimed it was a moral imperative," Zarthex replied, his patches darkening with the memory. According to their cultural liaison, humans cannot psychologically tolerate the knowledge that preventable deaths might occur due to inadequate safety systems. They offered to perform the work at no cost, using materials they fabricated themselves, with guarantees that exceeded our insurance requirements. "And the results?" asked the gaseous Nethian representative, speaking through a translation matrix. Zarthex's patches shifted to reluctant admiration. "Our ship can now maintain full atmospheric integrity through hull breaches affecting up to 60% of our outer shell. Our life support systems have 17 independent backup systems. Our emergency protocols include scenarios we never imagined were possible. And our engineering crew now requires 6 months of additional training just to understand the systems the humans installed." Similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Centaurian Trade Collective reported that human suggestions had increased their fleet's survival rate by 400%, but had also increased maintenance costs and crew training requirements to levels that threatened economic viability. The Rigel Mining Consortium found that human safety consultants had redesigned their entire operation around scenarios involving catastrophic equipment failure, hostile action, and solar system-level catastrophes, resulting in mining platforms that could probably survive direct impact from small moons but required crews with advanced engineering degrees just to operate basic equipment. The Commission's final report, compiled after months of investigation and testimony, painted a picture of a species so fundamentally devoted to preventing disasters that they couldn't function in a galaxy that accepted normal risk levels. The updated boarding regulations reflected this new understanding. Species classification: Homo sapiens, human, environmental requirements, standard Class M atmosphere with enhanced safety margins recommended. Boarding protocol: environmental suits and all associated equipment must be removed and secured in designated containment areas before entry to prevent accidental system upgrades, unsolicited safety modifications, or voluntary installation of obviously necessary backup systems. Warning: humans possess an instinctive psychological compulsion to improve any technology they encounter, viewing all safety margins as inadequate suggestions rather than acceptable limits. Their definition of basic precautions typically exceeds military specifications of most member species. This is not malicious behavior but rather an evolved survival trait from their hostile homeworld environment. Additional protocol requirements: human boarding parties must be accompanied by qualified cultural liaisons trained in disaster psychology. Do not, under any circumstances, allow humans to examine critical ship systems unless you are prepared for extensive modifications that will fundamentally alter your vessel's operational parameters. Human engineers are psychologically incapable of observing preventable safety hazards without attempting to correct them immediately. Documented consequences of unrestricted human access: human boarding parties who retain access to their environmental suits and tools have been known to improve ship systems to their own standards without authorization. Typical modifications include life support systems capable of maintaining atmosphere during total hull loss, navigation computers that automatically plot courses avoiding all known hazards, including those with probability ratings below 0.001%, power plants with enough redundancy to continue operations after direct antimatter attack, emergency protocols that assume worst-case scenarios in all situations, including scenarios that violate known physical laws, automatic distress beacons that activate if any system parameter falls below optimal operational levels, personal protective equipment lockers containing enough emergency gear to sustain entire crews for months in hard vacuum. While these modifications dramatically improve vessel survivability rates, they also increase ship mass by 200 to 400%, require complete crew retraining, and necessitate maintenance procedures that assume constant expectation of catastrophic failure. Most species find the psychological adjustment to human-safe, operational standards emotionally exhausting. Economic impact assessment. Human safety modifications typically cost 300 to 500% of original vessel value to implement and maintain. However, insurance rates for human-modified vessels are reduced by up to 90% due to their unprecedented survival rates under adverse conditions. Final regulatory note. Humans removed from their environmental suits and tools remain helpful, curious, and psychologically driven to prevent any possible catastrophe they can imagine. This is considered their natural state and cannot be modified through training or cultural exchange. The species appears to be fundamentally incapable of accepting risk levels that other civilizations consider normal. Special advisory. Complaints about excessive safety measures should be forwarded to the Department of Death-World Relations, which maintains a standard response explaining that humans literally cannot comprehend the concept of acceptable risk when applied to scenarios involving potential loss of life. Their risk assessment methodology assumes that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong at the worst possible moment and in the most catastrophic way imaginable. Cultural integration recommendation. Species wishing to employ human safety consultants should be prepared for fundamental changes in operational philosophy, significant increases in survival rates, and crew members who will never again be comfortable with normal safety margins. Captain Rodriguez read the updated regulation from the bridge of the Terra's Pride and smiled, sharing the document with his crew over the ship's communication system. The regulation had been distributed to every human vessel in space as an example of their growing reputation among galactic civilizations. "Well," O'Brien commented after reviewing the document, "at least they understand us now." "Do they?" Wright asked. "Because this still reads like they think we're crazy for wanting people to survive disasters." "Maybe we are crazy," Santos suggested. "Maybe we're the only species paranoid enough to assume that everything's trying to kill us." Rodriguez considered this, looking out at the stars that represented humanity's expansion into a galaxy full of species that had somehow learned to trust their technology, their environment, and their luck. In 3 centuries of space travel, humans had encountered solar flares, equipment failures, hostile aliens, rogue asteroids, quantum storms, and gravitational anomalies. They had survived by assuming that space was actively malevolent and preparing for disasters that more optimistic species couldn't imagine. Now they had found their place in galactic civilization, the species too paranoid to let anyone else die if they could prevent it. "Maybe we are paranoid," Rodriguez finally said. "But we're alive, they're alive, and apparently we're all going to stay that way whether they want our help or not." It wasn't the reputation humanity had expected when they'd first reached for the stars, but it was one they could live with. In a universe that seemed determined to find new ways to kill organic life, someone had to be the species that refused to accept preventable deaths. Someone had to care enough to be unreasonably, obsessively, magnificently paranoid about keeping everyone alive. That someone, it turned out, was humanity.